Jessica Tarlov thought she could finally corner the sharpest tongue from Louisiana with a single, condescending jab. Take an IQ test. It was supposed to be her crowning moment of liberal superiority, a way to humiliate Senator John Kennedy in front of millions of Americans. But stay with us until the very end, because 37 seconds later, the senator reached for a sealed manila envelope that would not only silence the room, but effectively rewrite the rules of political engagement on live television. You are about to witness a masterclass in preparation versus pretension that you won't see anywhere else. Before we dive into this legendary showdown, let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss the high-stakes debates the mainstream media tries to bury. The atmosphere inside the Fox News studio was electric, charged with the kind of friction that only occurs when ideological worlds collide under the glare of high-definition cameras. Jessica Tarlov sat perched in her chair, her royal blue blazer a sharp contrast to the polished mahogany of the desk, radiating an air of academic untouchability. For years, she had functioned as the progressive firewall on the network, often using her credentials like a shield to deflect the common-sense arguments of her conservative counterparts. Tonight, she wasn't just debating education policy. She was attempting to perform a public autopsy on the senator's intellectual capabilities. Her laughter was crisp and dismissive, echoing against the studio walls as she leaned forward to deliver what she believed was the killing blow. Across the table, Senator John Kennedy looked every bit the unassuming country lawyer, a facade that has tripped up many a DC elite over his long career. With his rumpled suit, unruly white hair, and reading glasses perched precariously on the bridge of his nose, he seemed more suited for a porch in Madisonville than a national news set. Yet, those who know the senator know that beneath that thick, honey-slow Louisiana drawl lies a mind sharpened at Vanderbilt, the University of Virginia, and Oxford. He sat there silently, watching Tarlov with a patient, weathered expression that gave absolutely nothing away. On the table before him sat a plain manila envelope, resting like a quiet piece of evidence in a trial that hadn't officially begun. The tension escalated when Tarlov doubled down on her elitism, suggesting that those who don't subscribe to the latest expert consensus are somehow cognitively unfit to govern. It was a classic display of the ivory tower mentality, the idea that a fancy degree and a fast-talking speed are the only true measures of a leader's worth. She wasn't just attacking Kennedy's policy positions. She was attacking the intelligence of every American who shares his traditional, grounded values. Jesse Waters, sensing the impending explosion, tried to maintain the flow of the segment, but the air in the room had already grown heavy with a different kind of heat. Kennedy tilted his head, a subtle movement that signaled he was no longer just participating in a discussion. He was entering a cross-examination. "Well now, Miss Tarlov," Kennedy began, his voice dropping into that familiar, deceptive calm that precedes a storm. He noted that while he had been called many names during his time in public service, being too dumb was rarely a label that managed to stick for long. The studio went quiet, the hum of the air conditioning, the only sound filling the gap between their competing visions of American leadership. Tarlov, sensing she had the upper hand, pressed further, insisting that expertise and data were the only valid currencies in the halls of power. She spoke of peer-reviewed research and analytical frameworks as if they were holy relics, completely detached from the lived reality of the people Kennedy represents. The senator didn't flinch at her barrage of academic jargon or her thinly veiled insults regarding his folksy demeanor. Instead, he questioned her premise, asking if her position was truly that people who didn't sound like her were incapable of understanding the complexities of governance. It was a direct hit to the heart of the liberal bias that often views the heartland of America with a mixture of pity and contempt. Kennedy reminded her that he spends his time talking to the men and women on the front lines, the teachers and parents who deal with the fallout of Washington's failed experiments. He argued that a New York seminar is no substitute for the wisdom gained by looking a struggling constituent in the eye. As the debate shifted from theory to practice, Tarlov's confidence remained unshaken, her posture rigid with the certainty of someone who has never had her foundations truly tested. She dismissed his anecdotes as mere stories, clinging to her spreadsheets as if they were a more accurate reflection of the world than the people living in it. Kennedy tapped the envelope with one finger, a rhythmic, deliberate sound that drew the eyes of everyone in the room toward the mystery sitting center stage. He pointed out that she seemed remarkably certain for someone who hadn't stepped foot in the rural districts she was so eager to overhaul from afar. The irony was thick. A champion of diversity showing a complete lack of tolerance for the diversity of thought and experience. The challenge was now out in the open, no longer a subtext but a public duel for the ages. Tarlov, in a move that would soon backfire spectacularly, insisted that an IQ test would be the ultimate arbiter of who deserved to be at the table. She was essentially betting that her elite background would naturally place her on a pedestal above the senator from Louisiana. Kennedy, ever the strategist, led her right to the edge of the cliff, asking if she was willing to subject herself to the same scrutiny she demanded of others. With her chin held high, she agreed, unaware that she had just walked into the most meticulously planned trap in the history of cable news. The cameras captured every micro-expression, the glittering lights reflecting off the glass table that now felt like a battlefield. Kennedy's staff knew the look in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had already seen the end of the movie while the antagonist was still reading the opening credits. He shifted in his seat, folding his hands over the envelope, and began the process of dismantling Tarlov's arrogance piece by piece. He wasn't just defending himself. He was defending the idea that wisdom isn't found in a zip code or a social circle. The stage was set for a revelation that would leave the liberal establishment gasping for air and provide a victory for every American tired of being looked down upon. Kennedy asked her a series of surgical questions designed to test the depth of her expertise, moving beyond the talking points to the granular details of policy. He questioned her on the limitations of the very study she cited, watching as her immediate, rehearsed answers began to slow and falter. It was the first sign of a crack in the armor, a moment where the expert realized the country lawyer had read the fine print she had overlooked. The silence that followed his inquiries was deafening, a stark contrast to the rapid-fire lecturing Tarlov had provided moments earlier. Jesse Waters leaned forward, his eyes widening as he realized the momentum was shifting with the force of a tidal wave. The studio lights seemed to intensify, casting long shadows across the desk as Senator Kennedy tightened the metaphorical noose around the liberal narrative. He didn't need to raise his voice to command the room. His soft, rhythmic drawl acted like a surgical scalpel, cutting through the layers of Tarlov's academic pretension. Every time he tapped that manila envelope, the sound resonated like a gavel in a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Jessica, usually so quick with a rebuttal, found herself caught in a cross-examination she hadn't prepared for, her reliance on abstract data failing her in the face of Kennedy's grassroots reality. The arrogance that had defined her opening remarks was slowly being replaced by a visible, creeping uncertainty that no degree from an Ivy League institution could mask. Kennedy pressed her on the difference between correlation and causation in the context of educational outcomes, a fundamental concept in the very data she claimed to champion. When she faltered, offering a textbook definition, but failing to apply it to the messy, real-world variables of a rural classroom, the gap between expert and leader became a canyon. He wasn't just asking for definitions. He was exposing the fact that her expertise was a mile wide but only an inch deep, built on papers written by people who had... You see, Miss Tarlov, the problem with your peer-reviewed world is that it often forgets the people it's supposed to be studying, Kennedy remarked with a thin, knowing smile. He reminded the audience that true intelligence isn't found in how many journals you've read, but in how you use that knowledge to serve those who don't have a voice in Washington. Tarlov tried to regain her footing, snapping that her credentials spoke for themselves, but the words felt hollow in a room that was now vibrating with the senator's quiet authority. She had demanded proof of his intelligence, and now, As he rested his fingers on the seal of the envelope, the reality of what she had asked for began to settle in her stomach like lead. The producers in the control room were glued to their monitors, realizing that this wasn't just another segment. It was a moment that would go viral before the show even ended. Kennedy didn't rush. He allowed the tension to build, letting the silence do the heavy lifting as Tarlov's confidence continued to erode. He asked her if her challenge was based on actual evidence or a deep-seated bias against anyone with a Southern accent and a traditional perspective. It was a question that demanded a mirror, one that Tarlov was clearly uncomfortable looking into as she shifted in her seat and adjusted her posture for the 10th time. Kennedy then moved to the concept of humility, pointing out that a truly intelligent person understands the limits of their own knowledge, a trait that seemed conspicuously absent from Tarlov's repertoire. He challenged the very foundation of her tests, suggesting that her desire to measure others was merely a way to validate her own sense of superiority. The envelope sat between them, a silent witness to a career-defining mistake that Tarlov was realizing she couldn't take back. She had issued a challenge of take an IQ test, and now she was about to find out exactly what happens when you underestimate a man who has spent a lifetime being underestimated by people exactly like her. As Kennedy finally prepared to crack the seal, he made sure Tarlov understood the gravity of the situation, asking one final time if she would accept the results regardless of the outcome. Her "I will" was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the sharp, bright sound of her laughter at the start of the hour. The adhesive on the envelope cracked with a sound that felt like a gunshot in the silent studio, signaling the beginning of the end for her narrative of liberal dominance. The sheet of paper he pulled out was thick and official, bearing the weight of an institution that even a skeptic like Tarlov couldn't dismiss. Kennedy held the document in his hands, scanning it with a calm precision that only added to the agonizing weight for everyone else at the table. He noted that the assessment was comprehensive, covering everything from analytical reasoning to executive function, the very metrics Tarlov had claimed were essential for governance. He wasn't just going to read a number. He was going to read a verdict on her arrogance. The camera zoomed in, capturing the slight tremor in Tarlov's hands as she realized the man across from her wasn't just smart. He was prepared in a way she never thought possible. Next time you challenge someone's mind, Miss Tarlov, make sure you've brought your own receipts. Kennedy would eventually conclude, but for now, the room remained frozen in anticipation. He began to list the percentiles, each one a hammer blow to the idea that he was anything less than one of the most brilliant minds in the room. The 98th percentile, the 99th percentile, the numbers weren't just scores. They were a total vindication of the conservative spirit and a rebuke to the elitist gatekeepers of Washington. Tarlov sat there, a portrait of stunned silence, as the man she tried to humiliate showed the world what true, quiet capability looks like. The revelation of the scores didn't just break the silence. It shattered the very foundation of the liberal superiority complex that had permeated the studio for the better part of an hour. Jesse Waters, a man who has seen almost everything in the world of political theater, sat back with a look of pure, unadulterated shock, realizing the magnitude of the moment he was hosting. This wasn't just a win for Senator Kennedy. It was a devastating strike against the gatekeepers of intelligence who believe that a Southern accent is a sign of a slow mind. Brad Stevens let out a low, breathy whistle, his eyes darting from the official document to Jessica's frozen face, as if he were witnessing a grandmaster finish a chess game in a single move. Lisa Wong, who had been watching with professional detachment, now sat with her hand over her mouth, her expression one of deep respect for the man who had just dismantled an Ivy League trap with surgical precision. The numbers Kennedy read 98th percentile overall, 99th percentile in verbal comprehension and processing, were not just statistics. They were an indictment of the arrogance that defines the modern elite. For years, the narrative from the left has been that conservative leaders are somehow less intellectually rigorous, less expert-driven than their progressive counterparts. Yet here was a man, often mocked by the mainstream media for his folksy analogies and slow-talking demeanor, proving that his cognitive function was in the top 1% of the entire nation. Kennedy didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The quiet dignity with which he held that paper was more powerful than any shout or lecture could ever be. He had turned Tarlov's own weapon, the demand for legitimate data, against her. And the result was total, undeniable victory. Jessica Tarlov, usually the most articulate person on the set, was suddenly a portrait of profound cognitive dissonance. Her lips parted as if to speak, to offer a rebuttal or a clarification, but no sound emerged. She had spent the last 20 minutes lecturing a man on analytical capability and statistical literacy, only to discover that he possessed more of those traits than almost anyone she had ever met. The realization that she had been the one lacking expertise in this interaction was visible in the way her posture finally collapsed, her shoulders slumping as the weight of her misjudgment became unbearable. She had gambled her credibility on the assumption that Kennedy was a caricature, and she had lost everything in the glare of the studio lights. Kennedy's voice remained steady as he slipped the document back into its envelope, the sound of the thick paper sliding home acting as a final punctuation mark on the debate. He looked at Tarlov not with anger, but with the weary patience of a teacher who had just finished a very difficult lesson. He reminded her that intelligence isn't measured by how much you talk or how many degrees are hanging on your office wall. It's measured by how you treat those who are different from you and how prepared you are when the world tries to count you out. It was a message that resonated far beyond the walls of the Fox News studio, speaking directly to every American who has ever felt looked down upon by a self-appointed expert class. The studio remained in a state of suspended animation as the reality of what had just happened continued to sink in. Kennedy had essentially conducted a public audit of the liberal mind and found it wanting, not for a lack of intelligence, but for a lack of the very humility and perspective that makes intelligence useful. He had proven that folksy charm wasn't a mask for a lack of brains, but rather a choice of communication from a man who understands that people matter more than white papers. The envelope, now tucked away in his jacket pocket, had become a symbol of a silent majority that is far smarter and more capable than the elites give them credit for. As Jesse Waters finally found his voice to transition to a commercial break, the air in the room felt different, lighter for some and suffocatingly heavy for others. The devastating live TV rehearsal had concluded, but the fallout was only just beginning. Kennedy had shown that when you come after a conservative with a superiority complex, you better be sure your own house is in order. He had brought his receipts, and in doing so, he had forced a representative of the New York elite to face the uncomfortable truth. The smartest person in the room might just be the one with the thickest accent. The fallout from the studio encounter rippled through the digital landscape with the force of a Category 5 hurricane, proving that what happened on that Fox News set was far more than a simple television moment. It was a cultural reckoning. Within minutes, the clip of Senator Kennedy revealing his cognitive scores had amassed millions of views, trending across every major platform as a symbol of the silent majority, finally pushing back against the condescension of the ruling class. Republican strategists and conservative commentators seized the moment, highlighting how Jessica Tarlov's blunder was a perfect microcosm of the Democratic Party's broader problem, a deep-seated elitism that assumes anyone from a red state is intellectually inferior. The receipts Kennedy provided became a rallying cry for millions of Americans who felt that their own intelligence and values had been consistently mocked by those sitting in ivory towers and television studios. On social media, the reaction was swift and unforgiving for the liberal establishment. Prominent conservative voices pointed out that the very people who claim to represent the working class are often the ones most eager to dismiss them as uneducated or incapable of complex thought. The irony was not lost on the public. Here was a woman who relied on peer-reviewed research and data-driven policy, yet failed the most basic test of all, the ability to accurately assess the person standing right in front of her. Kennedy's victory was hailed as a win for common sense over credentialism, proving that a Harvard-supervised assessment could validate what the people of Louisiana already knew. Their senator was 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. The mainstream media's attempt to downplay the event only fueled the fire. While some outlets tried to pivot back to policy discussions, the image of the sealed envelope remained burned into the public consciousness as a visual metaphor for the truth that the left is afraid to open. Political analysts noted that Kennedy had successfully flipped the script on the expertise narrative, demonstrating that true capability involves understanding both the data and the human reality it represents. This wasn't just about an IQ score. It was about the fundamental right to be heard without being judged by one's accent or zip code. As the week progressed, the Kennedy receipts became a shorthand for any moment where a conservative leader dismantled a liberal's arrogant assumptions with cold, hard facts. The senator himself remained humble, appearing in follow-up interviews with his trademark wit, reminding viewers that he didn't seek out the conflict, but he was more than happy to finish it. He emphasized that his intention wasn't to humiliate Tarlov personally, but to expose the systemic bias that treats rural Americans as a demographic to be managed rather than a constituency to be respected. This approach resonated deeply with voters, reinforcing his image as a champion who fights with both heart and an elite-level brain. The impact on Jessica Tarlov's career and the perception of the liberal media was equally profound. The incident served as a stark warning to other commentators. Underestimating the opposition is the fastest way to lose your own credibility on national television. It highlighted a growing fatigue among the American public toward the expert class that claims to know what's best for people they've never met and places they've never been. For the Republican Party, the moment provided a powerful template for future debates. Don't just defend your positions. Challenge the intellectual arrogance of the people attacking them. The studio at Fox News would eventually return to its routine programming, but the ghost of that manila envelope continued to haunt the discussions. Every time a liberal pundit began to lecture on qualifications or cognitive thresholds, the memory of Kennedy's 99th percentile verbal comprehension score stood as a silent rebuttal. It was a definitive turning point in the culture war, a moment where the folksy senator from Louisiana proved once and for all that in the battle of ideas, preparation and truth will always outweigh pretension and titles. Behind the scenes, the story of the manila envelope was not one of chance, but of a calculated, strategic foresight that defines the political genius of John Kennedy. Months before the Fox News segment ever aired, the senator had anticipated the line of attack that the liberal elite would eventually take, the questioning of his cognitive fitness based on his traditional values and Southern identity. He knew that in the high-stakes world of national politics, being underestimated is a weapon if you know how to wield it. He didn't just walk into a clinic. He sought out the most rigorous, independent cognitive evaluation possible, supervised by experts from Harvard University, to ensure the results were beyond reproach. He carried that sealed envelope like a hidden ace in a deck of cards, waiting for a moment of peak arrogance from his opponents to lay it on the table. This level of preparation is what separates a career politician from a statesman who understands the nature of the modern culture war. Kennedy understood that the left's reliance on credentialism is their greatest weakness. They often confuse a title with talent and a diploma with discernment. By allowing Jessica Tarlov to dig her own hole on live television, he wasn't just defending his own honor. He was setting a trap for the entire ideology of liberal elitism. He let her issue the challenge. He let her set the standards of legitimacy. And he let her commit to accepting the results before he ever broke the seal. It was a masterclass in the Socratic method, using the opponent's own logic to lead them to their own destruction. The Kennedy method of debate has since been studied by conservative activists as a blueprint for handling media bias. The lesson is clear. Never get defensive when your intelligence is questioned. Instead, raise the bar and demand that your accuser meets the same standard. Kennedy proved that you don't have to abandon your folksy roots or your regional identity to compete at the highest intellectual levels. In fact, his ability to speak the language of the common man while possessing a 99th percentile verbal processing score is exactly why he is so dangerous to the Washington establishment. He bridges the gap between the rural schoolhouse and the Ivy League boardroom, a feat that Tarlov and her peers find impossible to reconcile. As word spread about the senator's preparation, the narrative began to shift from a lucky break to a strategic ambush. Supporters pointed out that while the left spent their time crafting talking points, Kennedy spent his time gathering evidence. This proactive approach to political combat is what the Republican base has been craving, a leader who doesn't just complain about unfair treatment, but anticipates it and punishes the bias with undeniable facts. The envelope became more than a prop. It was a testament to the fact that conservative principles are backed by the highest levels of cognitive rigor. The aftermath of the debate also highlighted the psychological toll of elitism on those who practice it. Tarlov's inability to grasp that a man with a weathered look and a rumpled suit could outperform her was a failure of imagination as much as a failure of data. Kennedy's final words to her, to bring your own receipts, served as a definitive closing argument for an America that is tired of being lectured by people who haven't stood in the rain of real-world problems. He didn't just win a debate. He reclaimed the intellectual high ground for millions of people who refuse to be defined by the low expectations of the New York media. As we look at the legacy of this 37-second revelation, it stands as a reminder that in the age of viral clips and instant judgment, the truth still has the power to silence a room. The senator from Louisiana didn't just pass a test. He set a new standard for how we should evaluate our leaders, not by the schools they attended, but by the clarity of their minds and the depth of their preparation. The studio went quiet because, for a brief moment, the vanity of the elite was stripped away, leaving only the undeniable weight of the facts sitting on a glass table. The silence that descended upon the Fox News studio that night was not merely a lack of noise. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing in real time. Senator John Kennedy's triumph over the condescending elitism of the left was a victory that belonged to every hard-working American who has ever been told that their values are outdated or their intellect is insufficient. By pulling that single sheet of paper from a manila envelope, he didn't just prove his own cognitive brilliance. He exposed the hollow core of the liberal establishment's superiority complex. He demonstrated that true intelligence is not a performative act for the cameras, nor is it a weapon to be used for the humiliation of others. It is instead a tool for the defense of truth, a shield for the misrepresented, and a foundation for the kind of leadership that respects the people it serves. This moment stands as a definitive warning to those who reside in the ivory towers of academia and the media. Never mistake a person's accent for their ability, nor their humility for a lack of depth. The rehearsal America witnessed was a masterclass in why the conservative movement remains the true champion of common sense and intellectual honesty. Kennedy showed us that while the left is busy measuring others against their narrow, biased standards, the right is busy preparing to lead with facts, integrity, and an unshakable connection to the reality of the American heartland. He proved that when the experts demand a test, the prepared conservative will not only meet the challenge, but will redefine the very terms of the engagement. As we reflect on this historic exchange, let it serve as a reminder to never be intimidated by the titles or the perceived authority of those who look down upon you. The receipts have been brought, the scores have been read, and the verdict is clear. Arrogance is no substitute for capability. We must continue to support leaders who, like Senator Kennedy, are unafraid to stand in the rain of public scrutiny and emerge with their principles and their receipts intact. The era of allowing the elite to dictate who is smart enough to participate in the American dream is over. We are a nation built on the wisdom of the people, not the whims of the pundits. Thank you for staying with us through this deep dive into one of the most significant moments in modern political history. If you believe that common sense and character should always outweigh credentials and condescension, then this victory belongs to you. Don't let the mainstream media sweep this under the rug. Share this story to remind everyone that the smartest person in the room is often the one they least expect. We want to hear from you. Did Senator Kennedy's strategy change how you view these live debates? Drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Before you go, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel to join a community that values truth over talking points and courage over conformity. We are dedicated to bringing you the stories that matter, the debates that define us, and the victories that prove our movement is stronger and sharper than ever. Keep your eyes open, stay informed, and never forget, in the battle of ideas, the truth is the ultimate receipt. We'll see you in the next video as we continue to stand for liberty, logic, and the American spirit. The strategy employed by Senator Kennedy is now being hailed by political analysts as a definitive turning point in conservative media engagement. To truly understand why this moment resonated so deeply, we must dissect the tactical layers of his performance. Kennedy didn't just win a debate. He conducted a psychological operation against the very concept of liberal elitism. By maintaining his calm, folksy demeanor, even as Tarlov's rhetoric became more aggressive, he highlighted the stark contrast between Midwestern humility and coastal arrogance. This is a technique known as the strategic mirror, where a debater allows their opponent's own hostility to reflect back upon them, making the aggressor look unstable and the defender look like a pillar of strength. Furthermore, the timing of the envelope's reveal was a stroke of genius. Had Kennedy opened it at the beginning of the segment, the impact would have been lost in the initial noise of the discussion. Instead, he waited until Tarlov had fully committed herself to the idea that he was intellectually lacking. He allowed her to build an entire narrative of superiority, only to pull the rug out from under her at the moment of her peak confidence. This is the hallmark of a seasoned litigator who knows that a piece of evidence is only as powerful as the moment in which it is presented. It serves as a reminder to all conservative commentators that patience is a virtue, and silence is often the best setup for a devastating counterpunch. Looking back at American political history, we see a recurring theme of the overestimated elite versus the underestimated patriot. From Ronald Reagan's sharp wit in the 1980 debates to the common-sense clarity of modern conservative voices, the left has a long history of falling into the trap of intellectual vanity. They often forget that the American people value results over rhetoric and character over credentials. Kennedy's 99th percentile score is a modern-day continuation of this legacy, proving that the brightest minds in this country are often those who haven't forgotten where they came from. In the aftermath of the broadcast, reports began to surface from within Louisiana, describing a sense of immense pride among the senator's constituents. To the people of the Bayou State, Kennedy wasn't just defending himself, he was defending them. Every time a New York pundit mocks a Southern accent or dismisses a traditional belief, they are attacking millions of Americans who form the backbone of this nation. Kennedy's victory was a signal that the deplorables are not only capable, but are often superior in their understanding of what makes this country work. It has sparked a renewed sense of confidence in the Republican base, encouraging voters to demand more from their representatives than just campaign promises. They want leaders who can stand toe-to-toe with the media and win. As this story continues to circulate, it serves as a beacon for the next generation of conservative leaders. The lesson is clear. Don't be afraid of their labels. Don't be intimidated by their degrees. And always bring your receipts. The battle for the soul of America is being fought in every studio, every classroom, and every town square. With the intellectual rigor and steady courage demonstrated by Senator Kennedy, there is no doubt that the truth will continue to prevail over the hollow narrative of the elite. This concludes our comprehensive look at the 37 seconds that changed the course of political debate in America. We have seen the power of preparation, the fall of arrogance, and the triumph of a man who knows that in the end, facts don't care about your feelings, and they certainly don't care about your condescension. We hope this deep dive has empowered you to stand firm in your convictions and to never underestimate the power of a well-placed piece of evidence. Keep fighting for the truth. Keep supporting those who stand for our values, and remember that the best is yet to come.